The end of the 2025 Formula 1 season wasn't just the end of another Formula 1 season, it was also the end of the ground effect era that of course started back in 2022. And since then we've had 4 full Formula 1 seasons, and we've had some brilliant performances by many drivers over the course of that period. But who has truly been the cream of the crop? Who have been some of the most impressive drivers over the past few years? That is pretty much what we're going to be looking at in this video, where instead of ranking the drivers for just 2025, which we have just done over a week ago, we are going to rank the Formula 1 drivers based on the last 4 Formula 1 seasons, from the start of 2022 until the end of 2025. Before we get into things though, make sure to smash a like button on this video and let me know in the comment section below, at least for the top 10 over those 4 seasons, what is your top 10 for the Formula 1 grid? And this list, remember, is essentially us determining who is the best to, say, the worst driver on the grid currently. Because, of course, for 2025, we made our rankings for who did the best over the course of the year and who was the 5th best, 6th best, all of that. Doesn't necessarily mean, though, that they are the 5th or 6th best on the grid overall. So that is really what we are looking at today in this video. And just so you know, the drivers that we are going to be ranking in this video, we're going to be ranking all of the drivers who competed in 2025, except for Jack Doohan, who didn't do enough races. And we will be including Sergio Perez and Valtteri Bottas, because their Formula 1 careers don't seem to be fully over. Starting in 22nd place, the Argentine Franco Colapinto, a driver that was very impressive in his debut season. Of course, replaced Logan Sargent for the final few races in 2024 at Williams. And for my rankings of 2024 that I did on the channel, I had Colapinto actually quite high for what he did in those final few races of that season. I thought he did a really good job, considering the Williams car was not very competitive at the time, and he came in and put in some really impressive performances, and I was quite excited about what we were going to see from Colapinto going forward. Of course, didn't have a drive permanently going into 2025. Then he replaced Jack Doohan and has been very disappointing with Alpine. There has been some race weekends where he's been on the pace of Pierre Gasly, his teammate, and even been better than Gasly, but it just hasn't been enough. And when Gasly has been ahead of him, a lot of the times he's been ahead of him by a lot. And Colapinto just simply has not been anywhere near good enough. It looks like he's going to be keeping his place at the Alpine team for 2026. Alpine should be a lot more competitive in 2026, so maybe we'll see a refreshed Franco Colapinto, but I think if he was a bit more consistent, not just in terms of keeping it on the circuit, I think Franco does have the potential to be a decent midfield driver. But if you look at 2025 especially, he has been very inconsistent, not just with crashing a lot, but his performance level compared to Gasly has been really all over the place. So there is potential for Colapinto to be somewhat of a decent Formula 1 driver, but out of the 21 drivers we're ranking, I think he has been maybe not comfortably the worst, but just about the worst of the 21. Next up in 21st, Lance Stroll. This may surprise people. As you know, a lot of you know, I don't rate Lance Stroll whatsoever. I don't think he's really that great of a racing driver, to be honest. And quite frankly, given that he's been in the sport for so long and he's not really improved, I don't really think he should be on the grid, but he is, and we all know why he is. In the last 4 seasons, he definitely has not got any better. In 2022, when he was teammates with Sebastian Vettel, it was looking like maybe Stroll was starting to, maybe you could say, get somewhere, because he was actually doing a decent job at times against Sebastian Vettel. And it did promote a debate of, is Stroll actually getting better, or is Sebastian Vettel, who obviously went on to retire at the end of that season, was Sebastian Vettel just that past his prime? In the end, I think it shows, it turns out that, Vettel was pretty far past his prime, because Lance Stroll has not improved, or I wouldn't even really say it's got that much worse from then on. Alonso has completely destroyed him in the 3 seasons they've been teammates. Alonso has been very, very good in these past 4 years, but to be beaten that heavily by a driver that is not the absolute quickest over a qualifying lap, and with Alonso, we have to remember he's not the prime Fernando Alonso of 2012. Still a very good version of Fernando, but not, again, the prime version. For Stroll to not even get close to him is nowhere near good enough. It really is not. And Lance Stroll, as I've said previously, I don't think he is a good enough Formula One driver. I don't think he deserves to be on the grid, especially considering that he's not going anywhere as a driver in terms of improving. And, as long as he's on the grid, this is the Lance Stroll we are going to get. Now, in 20th place, Liam Lawson, a driver that has been, in terms of results and at times his driving, quite erratic. Lawson hasn't had the easiest Formula One career. 2023 did a few races. 2024 did a few races. And in both those seasons, had some races where he showed some real potential, but then had some races where he was really quite poor. So, not great there with the consistency. But for 2024, after the few races he did, he managed to get a Red Bull drive for 2025, which, looking back, was very premature for him because he was nowhere near ready to handle that level of pressure and that type of car that he went on to drive. Got dropped after 2 races. Had some good races, I think, in 2025, but overall it was still a disappointing season given how he was beaten quite handsomely by teammate Isaac Hadjar, who had a great debut season, but Hadjar is not, one of the top drivers in Formula One. So we have to remember with Lawson that even though there is potential there, he hasn't tapped into it anywhere near enough, and that's why I've got him ranked, quite far low down on this list of 22 drivers. Because even though, kind of similar to Colapinto in a way, but maybe a slight bit better, again, he's shown that he can be a good driver at this level. He's scored points, he's had some impressive performances, but it's just too few and far between. And you can't be like that and succeed in Formula One. Given the talent he has, I'm not expecting him to be on it and delivering every single Grand Prix. But he definitely can do better than what he's done so far. He's on the grid for 2026. He's got a new teammate in Arvid Lindblad. We'll see how he does against him. But Lawson, I think over the time he's done so far, 19th, I think, is a fair place to put him. I can't put him any higher than that. Next up in 19th, I'm going for the Finn, Valtteri Bottas. When this video does come out, it may have been confirmed that he is going to be racing for Cadillac in 2026. I don't know for sure as of recording this video, but of course, he did complete most of the ground effect era, and there were times where he was very disappointing and his pace was very far off what I think he can do at his best. And, we did see him put in some very good performances at the start of the ground effect era in 2022 when the Alfa Romeo car back then was, quite competitive. He put in some really good performances, but then, as the car got worse, he just completely fell away and was very disappointing in 2023 and 2024, mainly because of how he performed against teammate at the time, Zhou Guanyu. He really should have been dominating Zhou, because in terms of potential, I think Valtteri had a lot more in him than Zhou had, to be honest. But Valtteri ended up being pretty much level at times with Zhou, and that was ultimately, I think, what cost him his drive in Formula 1 at the time with Sauber. But again, it looks like he is coming back into Formula 1. But yeah, with Valtteri, I think he has the potential to put in some really strong performances. The pace, I think, is still there. But as we saw, especially in 2023 and 2024, has he got to the point where, obviously, he's past his prime at this point? His prime was probably about 2019, 2020. Has he got to the point where he just cannot find that performance as regular anymore, and it will be only once in a few races where we see Valtteri Bottas actually perform at a good level? We'll have to see when he comes back to Formula 1, but that is ultimately why he is quite far down on this list, because he, that phenomenal qualifying speed that we saw from him a few years ago, and even to a degree in 2022, he really did lose quite a lot in his final couple years. The next driver in 18th place is an interesting one. It is Yuki Tsunoda. And mainly, the reason I've gone with Tsunoda is because of the year he's just had at Red Bull. If he had stayed in the Racing Bulls car for 2025, I would probably have Tsunoda up in 10th or 11th place based on, the ground effect era. But because of how poor he was in that Red Bull, how disappointing he was, that's why I've got him down, as low as I've got him, because he was just absolutely awful in that Red Bull. So disappointing. Almost, not even almost, basically every weekend, miles off the pace to what he should have been doing, making what Sergio Perez did in 2024 in that Red Bull look actually a bit more impressive. Because, Tsunoda, how many times did he not finish in the points? How many times did he finish last in races? It was a few times, it felt like. Getting penalties for stupid incidents. Just really disappointing. And it could really be costly for his career, because the Tsunoda we saw in 2022 and especially 2023 and 2024 was a really good midfield driver, a driver that was on the cusp of being one of the top 10 best drivers in Formula 1. But after this Red Bull stint, it really has damaged his career and how we view him compared to other drivers. And that's why ultimately I've got him ranked down as low as I have. Again, without that Red Bull stint, he's probably around 10th or 11th place. So if he does get another chance in Formula 1, I think the message is, don't give up on Tsunoda, because there is a lot of potential in him. We've seen many times when he was at Racing Bulls or AlphaTauri, him, have brilliant performances, score quite a few points for that team, and really, he was dragging that team forward in 2023 and 2024. Without him, that team would have been basically nowhere, because Ricciardo was way too inconsistent, and then they had Nick De Vries, who was absolutely terrible. Liam Lawson, again, inconsistent. So the potential is there for Tsunoda to be a really good Formula 1 driver, and personally, I think he could be a reliable number 2 driver at a front-running team, as long as that team doesn't have a situation like Red Bull where the second car is so cursed, essentially, in terms of its handling and the results that it gets compared to the number one car. Red Bull, their situation is very unique. I think a lot of you would admit that. So, yeah, Tsunoda, don't give up on him. He definitely can still be good enough. I think he will get back onto the grid because there's easily enough talent there, especially for a midfield team, like an Alpine possibly in a year or so's time, to want to pick up and help them score a few extra points if, say, Colapinto is not doing a good enough job still. So don't give up on Yuki Tsunoda, but unfortunately his Red Bull stint was just too poor. One place ahead in 17th place, the Brazilian, who has just made his debut season, Gabriel Bortoleto. A decent season for Bortoleto. Outqualified teammate Nico Hulkenberg, who's been performing really well the last few years over the course of the season. Was outraced by Hulkenberg, though, and Hulkenberg obviously finished a lot higher in the championship. I can't rank Bortoleto any higher than this because, of course, he's only done one Formula 1 season. And the season, again, it was decent, but it wasn't enough to put him, on the cusp of the top 10 or anything. It wasn't that special. So, yeah, that's as high as I can put him. I am excited about what Bortoleto can do in the future. I think Bortoleto can be a race winner in Formula 1. I really do believe that. Remember, he was Formula 2 champion and was a good Formula 2 champion at that back in 2024. And as long as Audi, in maybe 3-4 years' time, deliver a race-winning car, I think Bortoleto could be the next Brazilian racing driver in Formula 1 to win races. Whether he'll be a championship contender, who knows? That's way down the line. But I think Audi have got a potential race-winning driver and podium definitely scoring driver in their team. Just needs to find a little more consistency, especially on race day. And if he can, especially compared to Hulkenberg, who's a really good benchmark, Bortoletto's in very good shape going forward. In 16th place, a driver that had a lot of hype going into 2025, Kimi Antonelli. Again, debut season, so I can't really put him any higher because we don't have a ton of data over the ground effect era to go through with him. As I went through in my driver rankings video for 2025, it was a disappointing season for Antonelli. He was beaten way too much by George Russell and had that stretch in the middle of the season where he couldn't score a point and was really underperforming. He did show some glimpses of the driver I think he will become. He's going to be a very good Formula 1 driver and I think quite possibly a world champion. At this point, I still believe in him at that level, but it wasn't a good Formula 1 season. He definitely could have done quite a bit better than he did. But again, only one season under his belt, so that's why I've got him as low as I have. Going into the new era in 2026, if the Mercedes is as competitive as we hope it will be, I can see Antonelli winning races next year and maybe being a title contender. Still, you would really, in terms of a title contending driver from Mercedes, you would really look at George Russell for that because he is quite a bit better at the moment than Antonelli, and obviously Russell way ahead of Antonelli in terms of his development of his career. But Antonelli is definitely going to get a lot better in these next couple years or so. So do not give up on Antonelli. Still a very special talent, and we've seen glimpses in 2025 that he could be definitely a future world champion. 15th place, another rookie, Isaac Hadjar. Brilliant rookie season. Hadjar had so many Q3 appearances and really was the team leader for Racing Bulls, and he even scored a podium in his debut season. What a debut season it was. I thought he would be one of the underperformers really of the season, and he ended up in my driver rankings video for 2025. I ended up having him up in, I think, 8th place. So yeah, what a season from Hadjar. But again, because it's his debut season, that's why I've got him as low as I have, because you can't really compare him to drivers like Ocon and Hulkenberg, because they've been in the sport for a bit longer and there's a lot more representative data from them in this ground effect era that we've just completed. Hadjar, though, obviously is going to Red Bull next year. Hadjar will be teammates with Max Verstappen, something that is quite cursed at the minute. We've seen what's happened to Lawson and Tsunoda, Perez to an extent. So I've got my fingers crossed for him, but it's not looking great in terms of where Red Bull are possibly heading in this new era, because Red Bull most likely are heading backwards, given Helmut Marko's now left the team. So many key people have left that team. It's unrecognisable at this point compared to what they were even just 3 or 4 years ago. So next year could be difficult, but without a doubt, he has been the Rookie of the Year for 2025. And even if his Red Bull career doesn't go to plan, there is clear potential for Hadjar to be a very good midfield level driver, even if, again, it doesn't work out at Red Bull. So yeah, great rookie season, and hopefully his time at Red Bull will go a lot better than his predecessors. And the last kind of rookie in this rankings, in 14th place, Oliver Bearman. Of course, Bearman did do 3 races in 2024. 3 races that were actually quite impressive, which I have added to my rankings for this, in terms of where I've considered him in the list. 2025 didn't start out that great for Bearman, but then he started to get very consistent, grabbing 11th place finishes quite a lot. He was doing enough to get in the points in terms of his own driving. The car just wasn't fast enough, though, unfortunately. But then the car improved a bit after the summer break, and he started to regularly score points. Scored points, I think, in the 6 of the final 10 races, which is very impressive in the Haas car, considering how competitive it was in those final 10 races. Obviously, ended up beating Ocon head-to-head in qualifying, which I thought was quite impressive. Ocon has been quite good over these last few years. So, Bearman, yeah, very good season. I was very impressed, especially with what he did in Mexico and Brazil. He showed, to me, shades of a possible top driver. Whether he can do that consistently, though, totally different story. We'll have to see going forward into next year. And if he does drive for Ferrari, which is looking, I'd say, quite likely in, say, 2027 or 2028, then we'll have to see, like I said, whether he can really become a top driver. But going into next year, it's going to be a very interesting one for Bearman, because next year I'm expecting Haas to have one of the worst cars on the grid, to be honest, because there are so many manufacturers in Formula 1, and Haas naturally should fall back, because those other manufacturers you expect to jump ahead and be comfortably ahead of them. So Haas will be starting a bit further back, I think, than where we have seen them at times in 2025. If the car is a bit more difficult to drive and is a bit more off the pace and is harder to get into the points, it will be interesting to see how Bearman copes with that, and whether he can still perform well, at least compared to teammate Ocon, and whether he can still get some really impressive results. So a good test, I feel, is coming up for Bearman at the American team. And now that's enough for the drivers that only did 1 season, or 1.5 seasons, if you want to call it. Let's get into 13th place, which is Sergio Perez. A driver that, after 2022 and 2023, He did, I don't think, the best he could have done, especially in 2023. I think Perez could have, I mean, he finished second in the championship, but he could have been a lot more comfortable in second, especially given how dominant that Red Bull car was. The reason, though, I've got him in 13th is because of how bad 2024 was. He was so poor that season. You know, after the first 4 or 5 races where Red Bull was so quick, obviously the car got a bit slower and Perez just disappeared. So many times, not scoring the points, missing the top 10 in qualifying. He was dreadful, and even though his successes in that seat have not done any better, Perez still deserved to be dropped from Red Bull, despite, what happened. If it wasn't for what happened in 2024, I probably would have had Perez in my top 10, but 2024 was just so bad, that's why I've got him in 13th place. But if he can get back more so to the form he was in 2020, 2021, 2022 as a driver, he could be exactly what Cadillac need to have a moderately successful first couple years in Formula One. So I really hope Perez can get back to that level, because he was really good during those times. And as you guys know, I am I wouldn't say a Perez fan, but I've always had a soft spot for him. I've always really liked what he's done in his career, especially in some of the cars he's had to drive. So, here's hoping that Perez can get back to that level, because Sergio Perez performing at that level is good for Formula One, because on his day, he is a very, very good driver. Just one place ahead of him, his ex-teammate back in the Force India days, Esteban Ocon. Ocon has been hit and miss, I would say, in this ground effect era. In 2022, he had a very good season. I don't think, even though he beat Alonso in the championship, I don't think he was as good as Alonso that season. Alonso was quite unlucky that year. I think Alonso was the better driver that year, but he was still quite impressive in how he compared to Alonso. I think he outqualified Alonso that season. So he did a good job against Fernando, without doubt. And then the first half of 2023 was performing well, was outperforming Gasly by quite a few points and all of that. Obviously had the podium in Monaco. But after that podium in Monaco, he just hasn't been quite the same driver. After that podium, Pierre Gasly for the next year and a half was comfortably the better driver at Alpine. And even though he did get another podium in Brazil, obviously his teammate Gasly was on the podium with him, he just has not consistently got back to that level we saw in 2022 and even 2021 to an extent. It doesn't feel like Esteban Ocon is the same level of driver now that he was, say, 2 to 3 years ago. I don't know if this is a slow descent for him and whether he's just going to keep getting worse, or whether he hasn't been helped by his machinery, which is quite possible. The Alpine last year was quite poor, and the Haas car this year has not been the easiest car to drive. Has had some good performances still, no doubt about it. But it does feel like he's getting slowly worse. But can he, next season, maybe stop the rot to an extent? We'll have to find out. But it does feel like Ocon is just slowly getting worse, and maybe in 2 to 3 years from now, we might not see him on the grid anymore if he continues this descent down the grid in terms of his own performance. We'll have to see. But if he can show his potential more, there is a very good midfield driver there. We know that. He's always been very good when he's at his best. He's always dragged good results out of all the cars he's driven when he's able to really get into the best form he can be in. So it's down to him as to what he can do. In 11th place, just outside of the top 10, Nico Hülkenberg. Finally, In 2025, he took his first podium in the most unlikely of circumstances, starting from the back, and got onto the podium in very torrential conditions at Silverstone. Even though I've been a bit of a critic of his career, I am happy that he finally got that podium, because even though there were some races, obviously, where he had the podium chance and threw it away, and I was critical of that, he's still driven well enough over his career to obviously be on the podium. There's no doubt about that. So I'm pleased for Hulkenberg in that way. Had a very good season in 2025. Not only that, 2024 and 2023 at Haas were very good seasons where he comfortably beat Kevin Magnussen. And especially, what's been most impressive is, if you look at drivers as when they get to the last few years of their career, normally what drops off first is the qualifying pace in terms of consistently being quick over a single lap. With Hulkenberg, it almost feels like he's got better to a degree compared to how he was a couple years or so before he left Formula One for a couple years. That's been the most impressive thing. He's been really competitive a lot of times in qualifying. I remember, was it back in Montreal in 2023? He qualified up in second place. Sadly for him, didn't start in second because of a grid penalty. But so many times, getting that Haas car he did up into the top 10. And then for Sauber, even though he got beat by Bortoleto over the course of the season, so, there was a bit of a drop-off this year, still had some really good qualifying results and brilliant race results, of course, as well. Maybe we are starting to see a drop-off with Hulkenberg, where, he is starting, the qualifying pace is starting to go. That is possible. But he is still easily performing well enough to be a really good asset for the Audi team for at least the next couple years, maybe 3 years, going into the new era of Formula One. Hulkenberg, I'm so impressed at the level he's been at since his return. Because remember, he did the odd race here and there in 2020, 2022. But, for basically 3 seasons, he was gone. And it would have been very easy for him to lose a lot of that speed over those years. But he kept himself in good shape, mentally and physically. And now look at him. He is performing just as well, if not maybe slightly better than he was before he left the grid. So well done to Hulkenberg for keeping at this level at the age that he's at. And now, guys, we enter the top 10, the coveted top 10. And pretty much this top 10 is how I view who are the top 10 best drivers in Formula One right now. So let's get into it. And 10th place, Pierre Gasly. A driver that a few years ago I was quite critical of. Obviously had a disaster of a Red Bull career, but then massively turned it around at AlphaTauri. What a career he had with them from midway through 2019 until he finally left at the end of 2022. In terms of this ground effect era, 2022 wasn't a great year for Gasly. It was a bit of a mid-season for him. Then he went to Alpine. His Alpine career didn't start off great, but again, after that podium for Ocon, it just awoke something in Pierre Gasly, and from then on, he was the better driver in that teammate battle at Alpine. Obviously had his own podium at Zandvoort, had another one in Brazil, and he was absolutely brilliant, I thought, in those couple years for Alpine. And even this past season, had some really good results. I remember in Bahrain, he finished in, was it 7th place and started up in like the top 3 or something like that. He was really good that weekend. There's been other weekends as well where he was very competitive. I remember Brazil, he somehow scored points in both the sprint and the race, despite being in one of the worst cars on the grid. So Gasly easily still has the pace that he's had for the last few years. I do feel a bit sorry for Gasly because these last couple years, he's been given really difficult cars to drive, and has still, a lot of the times, got the best out of it. So I'm really hoping going into 2026, if Alpine are a bit better, which I think they will be with Mercedes power, I really do hope, if the car is a bit better, that we will see Gasly maintain this level. Because if he does, he could be one of the top few performers on the grid next season. We know that if the car is really under him, especially in qualifying, this guy's got a lot of pace. So watch out for Pierre Gasly in 2026. But yeah, for me, he is one of the top 10 best drivers in Formula 1. And to be honest, I'd say he's been one of the top 10 best drivers in Formula 1 probably since 2020. And just one place ahead of him, the driver that replaced Pierre Gasly at Red Bull all the way back in 2019, Alexander Albon. A driver that, at the start of the ground effect era, had just come back into Formula 1 with Williams, had a year off where it wasn't looking great in terms of whether he would get back onto the grid. He managed to with Williams and hasn't looked back. 2022 was a really difficult season because obviously the Williams car was quite poor. He did get a couple very impressive results, but the car was just so difficult to drive that Albon was not really able to show what he truly had in that Williams car. 2023, though, I think was really the start of us being seriously impressed by Albon's abilities. Many impressive qualifying results and race results. I remember him finishing 6th at Monza, holding off the two McLarens who were a lot quicker. Was 7th in Canada. I think had a top 3 or a top 4 result in or at Zandvoort in the wet. He really impressed us that season. Continued that to a degree in 2024. The Williams car wasn't as quick in 2024 as it was in 2023, so it was a bit harder for Albon to keep up that level of impressiveness. But really, the reason I've got him in the top 10 is because of the season he has just had, where he was able to beat Carlos Sainz, something I didn't expect at all. I was thinking, after what Sainz did at Ferrari, I thought Sainz would be the better driver at Williams, which he was in the last few races of 2025. But for most of the season, Alex Albon was comfortably the better driver and had a fantastic season. And that's why he's in my top 10. And given his consistent, impressive levels of performance, he deserves to be one of the top 10 best drivers on the grid. Not really any doubt for me in that. In terms of going forward, Williams, I really do believe in going into 2026. I think they're probably the biggest dark horse for the 2026 regulation change. If they do get it right, which, the potential is massive if they do get it right, but if let's say they get it right to the point where they can be like they were, say, back in 2014, where we had a big set of regulations change for that season, and Williams got to the point where they could finish on the podium a few times, that would be a very good season in 2026 for Williams. And if they are at that level, I think Alex Albon, you will see him on the podium a few times. I don't think he'll win a race. I think that's probably a stretch too far. But I could see him on the podium a few times next season, especially if he keeps up the consistency we saw from him at his best in 2025, if the Williams car is competitive enough. So keep your eye out for Alex Albon, because it feels like he just gets better every season. In 8th place, his teammate at Williams, Carlos Sainz. Sainz obviously had a very good final few races of 2025, but 2025 still for me was very disappointing. He did not perform to the level that we know he can. He is more talented and at his best a better driver than Alex Albon. I think most of us would agree with that. So, he had no reason to lose to Albon in 2025, quite frankly. And that's why I've got him ranked in 8th and maybe not a couple positions higher. Because his Ferrari career was mostly quite impressive. In terms of the ground effect era, 2022 I still think was a bit of a disappointing season, given how quick the car was. But 2023 and 2024, he was one of the top probably 6 drivers on the grid in those 2 seasons. And in 2020, what do you call it? In 2024, I think I had him ranked in 5th place. So, shows you how impressed I was with what he was doing at Ferrari. Of course, won a couple races in 2024, won a race in 2023, and a race in 2022. So yeah, his Ferrari career, I think, went mostly as well as it could have done, given the circumstances of, how quick the car was, how competent the team was, all of that. So, yeah, the Ferrari career went well, but the reason I've got him ranked in 8th and maybe not 6th or even 5th is because of the season he's just had at Williams. If he had been doing what Albon had been doing, if not maybe a bit better, then yeah, I'd probably have Carlos Sainz in my top 6, but that's where I've got him. Carlos has a lot of potential, no doubt about it. He's a very talented driver. We've seen that talent in the last few years. If that Williams car is pretty competitive in the next 2 or 3 years, keep your eye out for Carlos Sainz, because especially with what we saw in Qatar and Baku, in those races in the back end of 2025, when Sainz is absolutely on it and getting the maximum from the car, he's a real threat. And if that Williams car is in a position somehow to win a race in the next couple of years, I think we could see Carlos Sainz on the top step of that podium. So keep an eye on the Spaniard. Definitely a lot more to come from Carlos in his career. I know he's been in Formula 1 10 years now, but he's nowhere near coming to the end of his career. He's got a lot more left in him, no doubt about it. In 7th place, a driver that it may surprise people, given especially the season he's just had, that I've got him in 7th place for this ground effect era. Oscar Piastri. Now, there's a couple reasons why I've got Piastri in 7th. One, he didn't do 2022. That does hurt his case a bit. The more data we have over this period, the better, obviously, it's going to make your case. But as well, if you look at his time in Formula 1, there's been some great race wins. Obviously, he just missed out the championship a couple weeks ago. But if you compare him to his teammate over this period, Lando Norris, if you look at the head-to-head against Lando over the course of the 3 seasons, Lando has dominated Piastri. Obviously, it was a lot closer in 2025, but Lando still ended up being the better driver. So you can't rank him as high as Norris. Obviously, you can't rank him as high as Verstappen, Leclerc, Russell. Drivers like that have been consistently great in the last few years. But also, with Piastri, we've seen, I think, a bit too much inconsistency with him. 2023, we only saw glimpses, really, of what he could do. 2024, he showed some more glimpses, but was still a bit inconsistent. 2025 was his most consistently good year, obviously. But then dropped off in the last few races of the season. And that's what cost him the championship. Him missing the podium, I think it was 6 races, which is criminal. If you're going to win a championship, you can't go that many races in that fast of a car, not finishing on the podium. That just cannot happen. And that's, those are all the reasons why Piastri, I've got him in 7th. Even though I do have Lewis Hamilton ahead of him on my list, I would say Piastri at the minute, based on 2025, is performing better than Lewis Hamilton. But again, this is a ranking of the drivers over the ground effect era. And over the ground effect era, he has not been as good as Lewis Hamilton. So that's why he is in 7th place. And the reason there I just mentioned Lewis Hamilton is because he is next up in 6th. In 2022 and 2023, I think Lewis performed really quite well. Was he the absolute best prime Lewis Hamilton we've ever seen? No. But he was still doing, I think, mostly the best he could. In 2022, I would say he was probably one of the top 3 best on the grid. Same for 2023 as well. Those 2022 and 2023 seasons, I think he did, almost entirely the best he could with what was a really difficult Mercedes package to drive at times. Sadly for him, didn't get a race win over that period. Did get a couple really great race wins in 2024, but 2024 was the beginning of the decline of Lewis Hamilton, and that's why he's down in 6th place, because of the decline we've seen, not just this past season where he was so poor, but 2024 as well, where he was dominated by George Russell. So, yeah, that's why I've got him down in 6th place. In terms of this being a list of who is the best down to the worst drivers on the grid, or in Formula 1 in general, Hamilton, yeah, maybe you could say is currently 6th, but going forward, that is probably just going to continue to drop, because it doesn't feel like his level is going to get any better. So, yeah, for this period, the ground effect era, 6th is the highest I think I can put him. And just ahead of him in 5th, his old nemesis, Fernando Alonso. Alonso, I feel sorry for, because 2023, finally, we were thinking he's got a front-running car, now can be on the podium, maybe get a race win or two, and we can see the real Fernando Alonso come back. And it only lasted, half a season at most. And Alonso, we were really robbed of even more great performances from Fernando in the Aston Martin, of him, scoring podiums and maybe getting a couple race wins in that car. Obviously, he still had some really great performances in the last couple years in what has been a midfield car, the Aston Martin. But the reason I got him in 5th is because he has still got the best out of the car and still been consistently really, really good in that Aston Martin. So, and a lot of the reason why I've got him in 5th place is because of how good his 2023 season was, where, as far as I'm concerned, in 2023, he was the closest driver to Max Verstappen that season. He was absolutely brilliant that year. But again, Aston Martin's pace dropped off, so we couldn't see Fernando get that elusive race win that I think really was possible in that car. Alonso, the reason I've gone with him just ahead of Lewis Hamilton is more so because of these last couple years. Alonso has remained consistently very good, whilst Hamilton has, his level has dropped quite a bit. So that's why Alonso just about sneaks into the top 5. 4th place, George Russell. A driver that at the minute is, I think, the closest thing to Max Verstappen on the grid. And I think Russell is very much ready to be a world champion. The reason, though, he's not in my top 3 for the ground effect era is purely because of the 2023 season he had. That season was really disappointing. He was so consistently poor. I remember in the middle of that season, crashing, being miles off his teammate, especially when we knew from the year before that he could do a lot better. It was a really disappointing season, looking back, for Russell. And again, that's the reason I've got him ranked in 4th place. If it wasn't for that season, I think I probably would have Russell, at least 3rd, probably even in 2nd position in my rankings here for the ground effect era. But that season in 2023, that's what puts him for me in 4th. But currently, I do think he is the 2nd best driver to Max Verstappen. But looking over the ground effect era, again, the consistency wasn't quite as there as much for him as it was for another driver, which we'll get into in a moment. But as I've said before, if that Mercedes car in 2026 is a championship winning or championship contending car, I think George Russell is going to be your next world champion, because in terms of speed and talent, this guy, without a doubt, is ready. And just one place ahead of him, fellow Brit and good friend Lando Norris, who of course is the world champion for 2025, the first to break the streak of Max Verstappen's dominance that we've seen since the start of 2021. And that, him being in the top three really is because of the championship he has just won, in terms of comparing him against especially George Russell. If Norris had not won the championship, I probably would have had him in 4th or even 5th place. But because of the championship he's won, that's what gets him into the top 3 for me. And what's interesting with Lando, if you look at these last 4 seasons, is I actually think his more impressive performances came earlier on in the ground effect era. 2022, I thought, was a really strong season for him. From him. In a midfield McLaren car, he was still able to finish ahead of both Alpine drivers, even though Alpine beat McLaren in the championship. Norris, I thought, was probably one of the top 3-4 best drivers that season. He was absolutely brilliant as far as I'm concerned. 2023, same again. He was absolutely brilliant in a McLaren car that obviously improved a lot mid-season. 2024, obviously, we saw a lot of potential great things from Lando, but he really continuously failed to deliver on it. And that's what allowed him to not win the championship in 2024. 2025, quite a remarkable turnaround, really, because he was at one point, over 30 points behind after that retirement at Zandvoort. And also had so many poor performances in the first half of the season compared to teammate Piastri. It really did not look like he was going to win the championship. But credit to him, final few races of the season, he got the job done, providing the results needed to get across the line to win his first world championship, and possibly the first of many, who knows. So, in a way, kind of feels like Lando got worse with his performances over the ground effect era. But if you look at the average of how he performed over the ground effect era, I'd say 3rd place is, for me, fair, a fair position to put him in. So I know some of you will disagree with that, because some of you, really don't like Lando Norris and have been as critical or more critical than me of him. But considering he's just won a championship and he, has had those seasons in 2022 and 2023 where he did perform really well, I cannot put him any lower than 3rd place, I'm afraid. And in 2nd place, to you-know-who, is the Monegasque, Charles Leclerc. A driver that really, I'm not saying should have been celebrating a championship in this ground effect era, but in an alternate universe, very well could have. At the start of 2022, nearly 4 years ago, a lot of people believed that Leclerc, his time had come in what was a very quick Ferrari car, but continuously Ferrari let him down. He wasn't, at his absolute best the entire time over this ground effect era. 2023 was not his best season. He had quite a few races where he just wasn't quite on it. Had a couple silly mistakes thrown in there. 2025, the season we've just finished, kind of feels similar to that season, but a slight bit better. But if you really look at 2022 and 2024, in terms of how he drove Leclerc, he drove easily well enough to be not just a championship contender, but someone contending for the championship down to the very final race. Whether he, wins it in a faster car or a more competent team, who knows? But Leclerc really does deserve a chance, a proper chance at becoming world champion like Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri have just had. Because Leclerc, the talent is clear. He is unbelievably quick over a qualifying lap. Overtaking wise, superb. The only thing he's lacking compared to you-know-who in first place is that consistency. He isn't on it absolutely every session like Max is. That's the only thing I think separating him from being the best on the grid. But if you give this guy a fast enough car and a competent enough team, he's a world champion. He is. In 2022, operationally, if Ferrari were at the level of Red Bull that year, I think Leclerc could have won the championship that year. Not saying he would have, but I think he very well could have. And then 2024, again, not saying he would have, but he very well could have got the job done. But he races for Ferrari, a team that continuously fails to step up to the mark. And that's why ultimately he will probably leave this team in a year or so, because they cannot provide him what he seeks the most, which is a world championship. Not just what he seeks the most, but something that he must win. He cannot go, his whole career without winning a championship. No way. This guy is way too good to not win a world championship. But over the course of the ground effect era, he has been the second best driver for me on the grid. And if only he could get that fast enough car or competent enough team or both, and then we could actually see Leclerc fulfill his dreams. And in first place, surprise, surprise, Max Verstappen. I don't think there's a lot to say about why I've gone with him in first place. He won 3 of the 4 championships on offer during the ground effect era. 2022, he was the best driver that year. Leclerc, again, performed really well that year. But I think, personally, if it had gone down to the wire, if Ferrari were a competent enough team, if it had gone down to the wire, I think Max would have still won the championship, because I think Max just has that extra bit of consistency that Leclerc doesn't have. 2023, Max won. It feels like he won every race that season. I know he didn't, but when you remember back to that season, all I can think of is Max, 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 Max. He won so many races in 2023. And then 2024, I think what was most impressive is that he won the championship in, over the course of the year, what was at least the at best, probably the second best car on the grid, maybe even the third best car on the grid. You could argue the Ferrari car that year was even quicker over the course of the season. So for Max to win that championship really added a lot, I think, to his credibility, but also how we view him all time compared to the other great drivers, and also how we view him currently compared to the rest of the field. 2025, he was the best driver on the grid without a shadow of a doubt. And also, not only that, if there was any driver in 2025 that deserved to win the championship, it was him. He was easily better than Norris and Piastri. And I think we all know that deep down, even if some of us don't want to admit it. He is the best. He is the benchmark. He is what Michael Schumacher was in the early 2000s, or what Ayrton Senna was in the early 90s, or what Lewis Hamilton was in the late 2010s, early 2020s. He is the benchmark that they all are fighting to match. And can anyone get on his level? I don't think they can. The only thing stopping Max Verstappen from winning a championship is him simply not having a fast enough car. And going forward into 2026, it does look like Red Bull are going backwards, which is probably going to signal an end to Max's career at Red Bull. But one thing that Martin Brundle on Sky F1 said at the end of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which is so on point with Verstappen in terms of the discussion of where will he drive in the future, is, and Brundle summed it up perfectly by saying Max is so good that he has the freedom to choose any team he wants for 2027 or 2028, because every team on the grid wants him, because they all know he is the best. So if he already doesn't have the best car, he has the comfortability to just choose whoever has the best car and go to that team and continue winning championships. So, Verstappen currently on 4 world championships. By the end of this decade, there is a decent chance he'll add 2 or 3 more to that list. But guys, that is my driver rankings for the ground effect era. Let me know in the comments section below what your driver rankings, at least for the top 10 for the ground effect era. Let me know your reasons if you want to, as to why you've gone with certain drivers in certain positions, like you did potentially for the last driver rankings video, which was only for 2025. But yeah, the ground effect era is over. Let's get into the new era of Formula 1 2026. Hopefully, we'll see much great performances from many of the drivers going forward. And until my next video of this winter break, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.